"You have to leave. This area isn't meant for people like you." Samantha Miller didn't even blink when she spoke. Her words rang out like a slap in the absolute silence. At 10:17 a.m. on a stifling Miami morning, inside the marble-floored VIP lounge of Summit Wealthbank, those words echoed like an irrevocable sentence. And Isabella Carter felt that blow, not because she believed the insult, but because she had anticipated exactly this moment. Isabella Carter walked in unassumingly, wearing a light blue cashmere sweater, dark jeans, and plain black loafers. Nothing about her hinted that she was the most powerful businesswoman at the helm of Summit Enterprises, which had owned this prestigious bank for the last 2 years. This was no accident. Isabella had deliberately hidden her identity to conduct a secret test. In her hand, she carried only a sleek tablet. No designer handbag, no flashy jewelry. She approached the teller's station and offered a gentle smile. "I'd like to withdraw $10,000, Isabella said in a calm, assured voice. "May I use the private VIP lounge?" The teller hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded and directed her toward the exclusive area. No sooner had the lounge door closed than Samantha Miller, the branch manager with her gleaming blonde hair and crisp suit, strode up, suspicion written in every step. "I need to verify the source of those funds," Samantha said stiffly, her cold eyes scanning Isabella from head to toe. Her tone betrayed the deep-seated bias she carried. Isabella met her gaze without flinching. "I provided all the required documentation when I opened the account. Isn't that sufficient?" "That's beside the point," Samantha replied, chin tilted arrogantly. "The bank reserves the right to refuse service to anyone we suspect of fraud. With a withdrawal this large, I'm not convinced you can do this without further explanation." A heavy, uncomfortable silence settled over the opulent room. Samantha's frosty stare dissected every detail of Isabella's attire, searching for any pretext to validate her suspicion. Isabella paused, fully aware of the discriminatory weight behind Samantha's words. But she wasn't surprised. She'd meticulously planned for this exact scenario. What she was enduring was the very reason she'd set up this covert trial. "I understand," Isabella said softly, a faint smile playing at her lips. "Let's see how this turns out." Isabella's measured, incisive tone made Samantha falter for a moment. Something about her felt off, but Samantha quickly pushed the unease aside. To her, Isabella was just another would-be fraudster, a person she'd already decided didn't belong here. What Samantha didn't know was that in just a few minutes, her life, and the careers of every complicit employee, would be changed forever. The air in the VIP lounge seemed to freeze, a stifling pressure settling into every corner. Samantha wasted no time. She stepped forward, ratcheting up the intensity of her scrutiny on Isabella. Folding her arms across her chest, she fixed the woman before her with a steely gaze, as if determined to pierce through Isabella's unassuming facade. "If you truly belong in this room, I insist you prove the source of your funds immediately," Samantha said coldly, her tone both challenging and suspicious. "It's a basic bank policy to mitigate risk, especially with clients whose backgrounds are unclear." Isabella remained unnervingly calm, meeting the branch manager's stare without flinching. Samantha Miller was clearly intelligent and sharp, but that edge was now dulled by the deep-seated prejudice in her mind. Raised amid privilege, schmoozing at upscale parties, and schooled to believe wealth must look a certain way, designer clothes, luxury handbags, an air of entitlement, Samantha felt personally affronted by Isabella's appearance. To her, a woman dressed in simple attire, demanding a large withdrawal in the VIP enclave, was a direct insult to the world she'd sworn to uphold. Before Isabella could reply, a harsh sound cut through the tension. Chad Evans, a regular high-net-worth client, swaggered past, confidence radiating from his expensive gray suit and perfectly styled hair. Without a moment's hesitation, he swiped the tablet Isabella had set on the counter, sending it crashing to the marble floor. "Watch it," Chad sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're in my way." He didn't even bother to glance back, as if the tablet's fall was beneath his notice. Isabella merely blinked, then bent to retrieve her device with deliberate slowness. Her composure remained rock solid, an unnerving display of strength in the face of blatant disrespect. That only fueled Chad's irritation. In his mind, she should have been humiliated, flustered, retreating from the very room he and Samantha claimed was not hers to occupy. Sensing the mounting tension and noticing curious stares from the other patrons, Brittany Foster, a young banker known for her sultry confidence and haughty demeanor, spotted her moment to assert a bit of authority. She glided in, wearing a disdainful smile, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Perhaps we should clarify that money's origin," Brittany drawled, arching a perfectly groomed brow. "Someone, dressed like you, requesting a large withdrawal in our VIP lounge. Surely that seems inappropriate, don't you think?" Her words reverberated through the room, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of onlookers. Soft murmurs rippled outward as clients exchanged skeptical glances, torn between curiosity and judgment. Yet Isabella stood unmoved. She locked eyes with Brittany and replied in a clear, measured voice that carried to every corner of the lounge. "Something I'm hiding. I'm hiding nothing. But perhaps what you're concealing is far more interesting." The calm confidence in Isabella's tone hit Brittany like a cold gust, an unfamiliar, unsettling chill. Brittany glanced at Samantha, seeking reinforcement, but found the branch manager equally riveted by Isabella's unwavering poise, scanning desperately for any slip. In that tense moment, Isabella realized she'd struck at a fundamental truth. Prejudice and arrogance had blinded Samantha, Chad, and Brittany alike, erasing any sense of right and wrong. What she was orchestrating went beyond testing a prestigious bank's service. It was an experiment in the very nature of each person present. And though the trial had only just begun, it was already exposing alarming truths, and promising far more dramatic revelations yet to come. The tension in the VIP lounge was palpable. Each second seemed to stretch indefinitely, and Samantha's and Brittany's suspicious gazes never once left Isabella. Several nearby clients continued to stare in her direction, their skepticism mixed with growing curiosity. But Isabella appeared completely unaffected by the prying eyes and whispered judgments. She quietly, deliberately reached into her cashmere sweater and retrieved her phone, her face still radiating that calm, enigmatic composure. "I think we've made the issue perfectly clear," Isabella said softly, her voice pitched just loud enough for Samantha and Brittany to hear. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to make a quick call." Samantha's brow furrowed in confusion. She was used to dominating people with her authority, but Isabella's extraordinary poise unsettled her. Brittany's eyes also betrayed her doubt. She shot a quick look at Samantha, as if expecting her to intervene, but the branch manager remained uncharacteristically silent. Without another word, Isabella turned her back on them and tapped a familiar sequence of numbers on her screen. After only a single ring, the confident, professional voice of Anna Scott, Isabella's trusted assistant, answered on the other end. "I'm here, Isabella." Isabella's calm, assured tone carried clearly through the line. "Anna, initiate Protocol 6. On the other end, Anna paused for a heartbeat, long enough to grasp that the situation was far more serious than anticipated. Protocol 6. The secret contingency Isabella had devised to gather evidence and take decisive action against any sign of prejudice or discrimination within the corporation and its branches. Anna moved swiftly. I understand. I'll start logging everything right away. Isabella ended the call and faced Samantha and Brittany once more, her signature serenity intact. A faint, knowing smile flickered across her lips, the smile of a woman fully aware that this game had only just begun, and that those who wielded power through prejudice would soon pay the price. Across the room, Samantha and Brittany both felt a creeping sense of unease. Brittany scanned the lounge, her initial arrogance giving way to an uncomfortable suspicion. She knew Isabella had just done something, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what. The tightening knot of distrust made Brittany restless. Samantha wasn't exempt. The woman who normally held every situation under her thumb now felt control slipping away. Yet her pride and faith in her own superiority were too great. She quickly convinced herself that Isabella was merely trying to intimidate them. A meaningless bluff, nothing more. "Who did you just call? Your lawyer?" Samantha asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm, even as her voice wavered with growing insecurity. Isabella met her gaze without emotion. "Not exactly, just a close assistant of mine. But if you're so curious, I promise you'll meet her soon enough." Isabella's gentle words rang like a sharp warning. Brittany exchanged a worried glance with Samantha. In that instant, both realized they had gravely underestimated their opponent. This woman before them was far more formidable than her simple appearance suggested. A short distance away, in the central executive office of Summit Enterprises, Anna Scott opened an electronic file and began meticulously recording every detail Isabella had just relayed. The screen lit up as she logged names of the involved employees, descriptions of discriminatory behavior and language, the exact date and time, and the witnesses present. Anna knew Protocol 6 was more than a routine investigation. It was Isabella's bold declaration of the values she had built this prestigious corporation on. To Isabella, rooting out every form of discrimination was non-negotiable, and anyone who violated that principle would face real consequences. Taking a steady breath, Anna's fingers flew across the keyboard. She understood that Isabella was embarking on a difficult battle, but she also knew her boss was more than capable of winning any fight she chose. And this battle, soon to unfold at the Summit Wealthbank branch in Miami, would change everything, sweeping away all that Samantha and Brittany had sought to protect with their deep-seated prejudice and bias. While Anna was quietly logging every detail from Summit Enterprises' central office, over at the Summit Wealthbank branch, Samantha's patience wore thin, and the contempt in her eyes was impossible to conceal. The initial unease she'd felt gave way almost instantly to the arrogance ingrained in her every fiber. Samantha was certain Isabella was just putting on an act, fishing for attention to hide the truth that she didn't belong here. "You think you're fooling anyone?" Samantha's voice rang out. Stripped of even the smallest trace of courtesy, her sharp tone filled the VIP lounge, deliberately loud enough for every nearby client to hear. "I've worked here long enough to spot people like you, a fraud posing as a VIP to steal money. It's disgraceful." Murmurs swelled around the room as a few patrons turned to stare at Isabella with outright suspicion. Bolstered by their unspoken support, Samantha raised her voice even further. "If you can't produce proof right now, I'll be forced to handle this matter in the most serious way." Standing beside her, Brittany seized the moment to demonstrate her own dedication. Eager to impress, she grabbed the branch's internal phone and dialed the security team. "I need guards in the VIP lounge immediately," she said without hesitation. "We have a suspicious customer to deal with. Send someone up right away, and be prepared to use force if necessary." She emphasized use force, as though silently instructing security to view Isabella as a genuine threat, someone who must be removed from this upscale space at once. Brittany's tone dripped with haughty satisfaction, as though wielding the power she derived from bullying those she deemed beneath her. Less than a minute later, the VIP door burst open. Derek Howard, head of security, known for his imposing build and aggressive demeanor, strode in with heavy steps. He believed in brawn and the authority his badge conferred, and cases like this were exactly what he lived for. Without warning or hesitation, Derek yanked Isabella's personal bag from the chair beside her, sending it crashing to the marble floor. Its contents spilled everywhere with a harsh clatter. "Stand up right now. You're being detained for non-compliance and hostile behavior," Derek barked, his face a mask of cold aggression. Witnesses gasped and whispered in shock at the rough, disrespectful treatment. Samantha looked on with a self-satisfied smirk, as if she'd orchestrated the very spectacle she'd envisioned, watching someone she'd dismissed publicly humiliated. Brittany, arms crossed, beamed at the swift display of her own authority, confident this would cement her status in Samantha's eyes and perhaps pave her way to future promotions. But at the eye of the storm, Isabella remained seated, her gaze ice-cold and unnervingly calm as she studied Derek and Samantha. She didn't leap up or show any sign of fear, exactly the reaction Derek expected. Instead, she met the hulking guard's eyes and spoke in a measured, quiet voice. "You should think twice before touching me again," Isabella said, her tone soft yet cutting. "Everything you're doing right now will be accounted for." Derek paused, taken aback for a moment, then stiffened back into his usual tough guy posture. To him, Isabella was just a woman spouting empty threats, but deep down, that calm resolve unnerved him in a way he'd never experienced. In the corner of the room, Samantha and Brittany exchanged triumphant looks, sure they'd just delivered a powerful warning to anyone who dared encroach on their privilege, a realm measured by biased assumptions and polished appearances. What they didn't realize was that their haughty, contemptuous actions weren't isolated incidents. They represented the climax of a system rotten with prejudice and discrimination. And Isabella, sitting there with that terrifying composure, was the only person capable of toppling that corrupt system in the next fleeting moment. The stifling atmosphere in the VIP lounge had now gone far beyond normal. As Samantha and Brittany watched with satisfaction, believing they had cornered Isabella, a resolute voice rang out from the corner, shattering the oppressive silence. "Hold on, that's illegal," the voice boomed, so clear that every head snapped toward its source. Marcus Taylor, a tall black client with a calm, upright bearing and a look of integrity, slowly rose from his seat. A successful businessman, Marcus was no stranger to the scrutiny and prejudice he'd faced in the past. But today, witnessing Derek's blatant mistreatment of Isabella, he could no longer stay silent. "You have no right to detain or handle anyone so roughly," Marcus said, locking eyes with Derek. His tone was authoritative yet collected. "She's done nothing wrong, nor has she resisted. You've just violated her rights in a serious way." Derek glanced at Marcus, momentarily thrown by the unexpected intervention. But he quickly regained his usual cold composure, shooting back with a challenging look. "I'm simply enforcing bank policy. You're a customer. Sit down and don't interfere with our work." Marcus didn't budge. He stood tall, exuding confidence and resolve. "Which policy lets you trample people's rights like that? You're creating a serious situation, and you will be held accountable." The spectators shifted in their seats. The skeptical stares that had been fixed on Isabella now turned to Derek and the bank staff. The tension was still high, but now it carried empathy and growing awareness. At that moment, a young but equally determined voice spoke up, drawing all eyes. Nia Brooks, a young woman of color with natural curls and a steadfast gaze. Nia stood, her voice trembling slightly but full of strength. "You know what? Brittany Foster once refused to serve me here just because of how I looked," Nia said clearly. "She told me someone like me would never qualify as a Summit Wealthbank client. I tried to stay silent, to forget that humiliation, but not today." Heads whipped toward Brittany, who froze in embarrassment and anger. Accustomed to wielding power over others, she suddenly found herself the target of accusations. Her fury mingled with fear. "That's a baseless lie," Brittany snapped, though the shake in her voice betrayed her. But her protest did nothing to quell the outrage and indignation swelling in the room. Marcus stepped beside Nia, their solidarity a powerful rebuke to anyone who'd doubted them. Samantha, now completely losing control, frantically signaled Brittany, "Call the police. This is disorderly conduct and defamation of the bank." Brittany snatched up her phone, dialing with trembling fingers. She made sure to stress disturbance, threat to safety, and defamation, hoping the police would swiftly remove Marcus and Nia and restore the peace she craved. A few minutes later, sirens wailed in the distance. 2 officers entered the VIP lounge, their faces serious. Their arrival pushed the room's tension to a breaking point. Nervous whispers fluttered among the clients. One officer approached Samantha and Brittany, asking crisply, "We received a disturbance call. Who placed it?" Brittany hurried forward, trying to appear confident despite her panic. "I did. These people are causing a commotion and defaming our staff." The officer surveyed the scene, pausing on Isabella, Marcus, and Nia as he tried to discern the truth behind the chaos. In that moment, Isabella took a small step forward, serene yet undeniably powerful, her eyes meeting his with sincere conviction. "Officers, I believe this needs to be sorted out right now," she said calmly. "I promise the truth will surprise you all." Samantha and Brittany exchanged a glance, and their once confident expressions had completely vanished, replaced by a silent, deep-seated fear. They both felt it. They'd just made a grave mistake, and its repercussions were about to play out in front of everyone. The tense hush that the officer brought into the room seemed to stretch on forever. Every eye was fixed on Isabella. She stood there, calm and unwavering, her gaze bright with resolve, a silent authority so strong it demanded everyone's attention. "I think now is the time to clear everything up," Isabella said, her voice measured and precise, each word carrying its own weight. She locked eyes with the officer, then swept her gaze across Samantha, Brittany, Chad, and Derek, ensuring they'd all listen closely to what she was about to say. "I am Isabella Carter," she announced softly, yet the declaration echoed powerfully through the lounge. "CEO of Summit Enterprises, and I've owned this bank for the past 2 years." The silence that followed froze everyone in place. In an instant, every doubt and whisper was swept aside by the shock of this unexpected revelation. The heavy atmosphere was torn apart by a truth no one saw coming. Samantha, who only moments before had brimmed with arrogance, now looked ashen. Her eyes went wide with horror, and her breath caught. Every cruel word and contemptuous glance she'd aimed at Isabella crashed back on her, a silent but unrelenting fear tightening its grip on her mind. Samantha had never imagined losing control like this, especially not to someone she'd so thoroughly dismissed, who turned out to hold the highest power of all. Brittany was no better off. Her usual smug confidence vanished entirely. She trembled, face pale, eyes darting frantically as if searching for some sign that this was all a cruel joke. But the reality before her was unalterable, a brutal truth she'd never been prepared to face. By flaunting her haughty, discriminatory attitude, she had condemned herself. Across the room, Chad Evans, the wealthy patron who'd tossed Isabella's tablet, was now completely silent. His sense of superiority evaporated, replaced by shock and shame. He felt ensnared by an invisible trap, sprung by his own arrogance. Most rattled of all was Derek Howard, the head of security known for his aggression. He stood there as though every ounce of his strength had been drained away. His legs quivered, and the fierceness in his eyes had vanished. Every rough gesture, every insulting remark replayed in his mind in slow motion, scenes that now filled him with unprecedented dread. "I think we can all agree there's been a major misunderstanding today," the officer finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence. He turned to Isabella with clear respect. "Miss Carter, we're prepared to hear whatever you have to say." Isabella nodded gently, her gaze returning to those who had so recently demeaned her, Samantha, Brittany, Chad, and Derek. She looked directly at Samantha, her voice still calm but as cold as ice. "I'm afraid I'm not surprised by what's happened today. I came here to test the state of affairs at the bank I run, a place that should stand for fairness, professionalism, and absolute equality." Samantha seemed to collapse under those words, straining for a rebuttal she couldn't form. Brittany could only bow her head, unable to meet Isabella's piercing stare. "Every action and word you've uttered today has been documented," Isabella continued, her tone deliberate and clear, "and, of course, there will be appropriate consequences." Standing proudly beside Isabella, Marcus Taylor and Nia Brooks wore expressions of both pride and emotion. They'd just witnessed a rare moment of justice and truth laid bare for all to see. As for Samantha, Brittany, Chad, and Derek, those who had belittled and insulted Isabella, they now faced a harsh reality. They had made the gravest mistake of their lives. It wasn't merely a misunderstanding, but the inevitable outcome of prejudice, arrogance, and contempt. And in that brief moment, they all realized something terrifying. They had engineered an irreversible situation, one that would change their lives forever. In the suffocating silence that followed Isabella's declaration, the truth began to spread through the room, making everything terrifyingly clear. Samantha and Brittany stood there, utterly powerless, their eyes still vacant, unable to believe the reality before them. Chad hung his head, avoiding the accusing glances of the other clients. Derek took a step back, as if he wanted to disappear into the space behind him and escape the consequences rushing in. In that tense moment, Stephen Harris, the assistant branch manager, who'd been silent until now, suddenly stepped forward. Stephen wasn't like Samantha or Brittany. He was quiet, reserved, and usually stayed out of conflicts. But this time, his face bore a tortured expression, full of inner struggle and anguish, revealing the fierce battle raging within him. I need to say something," Stephen began, his voice trembling slightly, his eyes avoiding Isabella's as though the truth was too bitter to meet head-on. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter, what happened today? It wasn't an accident." Samantha and Brittany whirled to face Stephen, their eyes wide with horror and alarm. But Stephen had nowhere to retreat. He drew a deep breath and continued, each word sending another chill through the room. "It was Brittany who deliberately created a false report accusing you of causing a disturbance. She wanted the police here sooner, believing their arrival would let them control the situation and have you removed more quickly." Stephen's confession landed like a crushing blow on Brittany. She went pale, scrambling to deny it in a panic. "Stephen, what are you talking about? Don't make up lies to pin this on me." But Stephen didn't waver. He shook his head, his tone firm and clear. "I'm not making this up, Brittany. I saw you do it with my own eyes. You thought no one would notice, but I saw every move and every intent. I stayed silent out of fear of getting implicated, but I can't stay quiet any longer." The VIP lounge fell silent once again, the clients around them aghast and furious. Samantha looked at Brittany with a mixture of blame and panic, realizing she'd just lost the last shred of her authority and backup. At that moment, Derek Howard, the head of security, once brimming with brute confidence, also spoke up, his voice unexpectedly weak, devoid of its usual aggression. He looked down, as though unable to face Isabella directly. "Ms. Carter, I have something to confess too," he murmured. "I used an internal risk flag system to mark certain customers I deemed unfit for the bank's image. In reality, those flags targeted customers of color, or anyone Samantha and Brittany told me to watch closely." Derek's admission exploded like a bomb in the room, leaving everyone stunned. Marcus and Nia exchanged furious looks as they realized the discrimination wasn't just isolated incidents, but a systematic effort to push clients like them out under the guise of bank policy. Isabella listened silently, her gaze sharpening, cold but laced with sorrow at what she'd just heard. The people before her, Stephen, Derek, Brittany, Samantha, had all betrayed the bank's core values through arrogance, self-interest, and prejudice. Samantha trembled, her face contorted with raw fear, glaring at Derek and Stephen as if blaming them for betraying her at the crucial moment. Brittany nearly collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. She now understood that everything she'd built on arrogance and deceit had crumbled beyond repair. "This has gone far enough," Isabella said, her voice icy and precise, each word carrying the weight of judgment. "The system you created not only violates basic ethical principles, but also directly damages the reputation of the bank I've worked tirelessly to build." Marcus stepped forward beside Isabella, his voice ringing with strength and resolve. "What happened here today is more than a personal matter. It's clear evidence of systemic bias, and I believe it's time to end it once and for all." Nia stood beside Marcus, her eyes shining with tears and determination. "We can no longer stay silent. The truths revealed today must see the light, and those responsible must answer for what they've done." Isabella nodded in agreement, her gaze sweeping the room before locking onto Samantha, Brittany, Derek, and Stephen. "You will be held fully accountable for your actions," she declared. "And I promise you, from this day forward, no one will be able to hide the truth again." In that moment, everyone who had confessed understood they'd lost everything. Their arrogance, greed, and prejudice had led them to an irreversible abyss, and now the bitter consequences stood revealed before their eyes. In the suffocating silence that followed Derek's and Stephen's bitter confessions, an older man with snowy white hair and a troubled expression slowly rose from his seat in the far corner of the VIP lounge. The room's tension seemed to ease just enough as everyone's eyes turned toward him. Isabella, too, glanced back, surprise flickering in her gaze as she recognized him. "My name is Arthur Jenkins," he began, his voice deep and thoughtful, as though each word carried the weight of inner torment. "I retired a few years ago, but before that I was the bank's training manager. I personally trained Samantha, Brittany, and many other employees who still work here." Samantha and Brittany froze, staring at Arthur in shock. In their minds, he'd always been the embodiment of a stern, capable manager, someone they'd admired and tried to emulate. But now, in Arthur's tone and eyes, they saw genuine remorse and sincerity they'd never noticed before. Arthur drew in a deep breath, as if gathering every ounce of courage to speak a truth he'd buried for years. "I must admit something deeply painful," he said, pausing so the room would hang on his next words. "I was the one who inadvertently planted an undercurrent of bias in our staff. In training sessions, I emphasized an ideal customer profile, wealthy, polished in appearance, and yes, tied to certain races." He paused again, eyes cast downward in regret. The room fell into complete silence, waiting for him to continue. "I never used overtly discriminatory language," he went on, "but those unspoken criteria fostered deep-seated favoritism and prejudice in how our employees viewed customers. I laid the groundwork for a flawed system, one that cast people like Ms. Carter, like Marcus, like Nia, under suspicion the moment they walked through our doors." Samantha and Brittany stared at Arthur, their jaws dropping as they realized their actions weren't just personal failings. They stemmed from a culture of bias ingrained over years of training and leadership under him. Lifting his eyes to meet Isabella's, Arthur's voice trembled with earnestness and resolve. "Miss Carter, I am profoundly sorry for what I've done. For years, I convinced myself these were standard business practices, but today's painful consequences make clear I can no longer evade responsibility." Isabella studied him a moment, weighing the sincerity in his confession. Finally, she nodded gently, her expression still stern. "Mr. Jenkins, I appreciate you standing up and admitting your mistake. But the more important question is, what will you do now to repair the harm you've caused?" Arthur nodded, his gaze regaining strength and determination. "I promise you, starting today, I will do everything in my power to support you and this bank in completely eradicating this culture of discrimination. I'm ready to take part in new training programs to help build clear, ethical standards so that no employee here ever repeats these mistakes." Hearing this, Samantha and Brittany grasped the gravity of their wrongdoing. They'd viewed Arthur as their career mentor, the standard for behavior, only to learn that the very principles they'd followed were fundamentally flawed. Isabella turned to face Samantha and Brittany, her tone firm yet softened by compassion. "You've heard him clearly. Bias isn't just in actions, it's in the systems we create and trust. Unless we acknowledge that, real change will never happen." Marcus and Nia stood together, feeling the power of the moment. For them, Arthur's confession signified more than one person's remorse. It heralded a profound shift coming to the bank's culture, a true revolution aimed at rooting out the injustices they'd endured. Stepping closer to Isabella, Arthur spoke with unwavering sincerity. "Ms. Carter, please allow me to stand by your side in this reform. I'll dedicate the remainder of my energy to correcting the mistakes I set in motion. And I believe that, with change at its roots, Summit Wealthbank will no longer tolerate prejudice or bias." In that instant, the entire room recognized they had witnessed a historic turning point. A deep awakening not only for Arthur, but for the system itself. Samantha and Brittany bowed their heads, silently acknowledging that, whether they liked it or not, they would now face the unavoidable consequences of their actions. The moment Arthur Jenkins finished his heartfelt pledge, Isabella's gaze swept back to those responsible for today's grievous events. A grave hush fell over the VIP lounge as everyone awaited her final decisions. She, who had remained composed and poised from the start, her eyes now sharp and resolute. "You all need to understand one thing," Isabella began slowly, her voice firm and unmistakable. Justice does not end with confessions or belated apologies. Justice demands accountability and clear consequences for every wrongdoing. She fixed her eyes on Samantha Miller without flinching. Samantha Miller, for your egregious racial discrimination, abuse of power to humiliate, and defamation of our client, you are hereby terminated, effective immediately. From this moment on, you are no longer an employee of Summit Wealthbank. Samantha seemed to crumble, her body trembling at Isabella's declaration. The fear, confusion, and despair she once inflicted on others now haunted her own eyes. Isabella then turned to Brittany Foster, who stood shaking and bowing her head under the CEO's icy stare. Brittany Foster, your deliberate falsification of reports to pressure a customer, calling the police solely to degrade and humiliate, is utterly unacceptable. Summit Wealth Bank will not tolerate deceit or discrimination. You are also terminated immediately and will face any legal consequences your actions warrant. Brittany could not speak. Tears streamed down her once vanity-shielded face. She now fully comprehended the destructive power of truth, and that her calculated, deceitful conduct had cost her everything, her career and her dignity. Next, Isabella addressed Stephen Harris, who just admitted his complicity. Stephen still kept his head bowed, hoping his honesty might spare him the harshest fate. Stephen Harris, Isabella continued, her tone cold but fair. Though you courageously confessed, that does not absolve you from your role in enabling these wrongs. You chose silence while injustice unfolded before you. Therefore, you too are terminated, effective immediately. Stephen nodded in silent acceptance, realizing that to remain silent in the face of injustice is to become complicit. Isabella's gaze then fell on Derek Howard, the head of security who had wielded force against others. Derek avoided her eyes, his hands trembling. Derek Howard, your illegal use of force and violation of a customer's rights and dignity are intolerable at Summit Wealthbank. You are relieved of your duties immediately and will face appropriate legal action. Derek said nothing, hanging his head as late remorse weighed heavily on him. His once absolute authority had become a double-edged sword, inflicting an irreversible wound on his own life. Finally, Isabella looked at Chad Evans, the wealthy client who believed his money and status placed him above everyone. Chad Evans, while you are not an employee, your acts of racial discrimination and disdain are equally unforgivable. You are permanently banned from all Summit Wealth Bank branches and services. We do not welcome anyone who harbors prejudice and hatred. Chad's face went pale. Never had he imagined he'd be publicly condemned in this way. Accustomed to respect and fear, he now understood that wealth and privilege could not mask his fundamental failings. Silence enveloped the room after Isabella's pronouncements. The other clients watched quietly, some nodding in approval of her decisive actions. Marcus and Nia stood by her side, their eyes reflecting strong faith in the justice just served. Even Arthur Jenkins nodded, recognizing that genuine reform had begun. Isabella surveyed the room one last time, her voice stern yet infused with unwavering determination. Today, we have witnessed the grave consequences of prejudice and hatred. Summit Wealth Bank will not tolerate any form of discrimination or bias ever again. We are committed to fostering a workplace and customer experience founded on fairness, transparency, and respect. In that moment, to everyone present, Isabella was more than just their leader. She had become the very symbol of justice, and the promise that from now on, equality and compassion would no longer be distant ideals, but inviolable principles protected at this bank. In the solemn hush that followed the firings, Isabella cast a calm, resolute gaze around the VIP room once more. Everyone could feel that this bold move was only the first in a series of decisive actions to come. Isabella's voice rang out, each word clear and indelible. Today's events are not merely isolated personal mistakes. They reflect a serious problem that has taken root in the very culture of this branch. Therefore, I hereby declare, effective immediately, all operations at the Miami branch will be suspended for a comprehensive, top-to-bottom overhaul. Her announcement left everyone stunned. They had never seen a CEO act with such speed and conviction. Samantha, Brittany, Derek, and Stephen stood there, helplessly realizing that their mistakes had jeopardized not only their own careers, but had inflicted serious and unmistakable damage on the entire branch. In that moment, Isabella was no longer just an ordinary business leader. She became a living emblem of justice, of the powerful, resolute change everyone had been craving. She continued with a voice both confident and solemn. I am officially launching the Summit Equity Program. This is not an empty promise. It is a concrete, detailed plan of action. Starting today, every bank employee will undergo a thorough audit of their words, attitudes, and behaviors to ensure there is absolutely no room for bias, racism, or any form of inappropriate conduct. Her gaze swept the room again, pausing on Arthur Jenkins, an older man standing respectfully beside her, his expression one of deep contrition. Arthur offered a gentle nod, signaling his full support for her decision. The other employees, silent until now, suddenly felt the weight of the shift, an imperative to root out and replace outdated prejudices at their core. Isabella went on, her tone both firm and considerate. The Summit Equity Program will go far beyond merely retraining staff or updating procedures. It will include a transparent, fair evaluation system in which each individual is personally accountable for their behavior and attitude. Any hint of favoritism or discrimination, no matter how small, will be identified and dealt with swiftly and strictly. Marcus and Naya stood quietly, their eyes bright with belief in a new future, one in which they and all customers would never have to endure prejudice or indignity again. To them, Isabella's words were more than just promises. They were the heartfelt commitment of a true leader. Samantha and Brittany bowed their heads, finally accepting that their careers at the bank were over. In their minds, deep regret began to replace the arrogance and indifference they had once felt. They recognized that however they might have rationalized it, their prejudiced actions had forced Isabella to initiate this far-reaching reform. Arthur Jenkins then stepped forward and addressed Isabella with solemn respect. I wholeheartedly support this program and pledge to stand with you as we rebuild our bank's culture. We will root out every last bias that has lingered here too long so that Summit Wealthbank truly becomes a place where every customer, regardless of background, skin color, or circumstance, is treated with fairness and respect. Isabella nodded gratefully at Arthur's pledge. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but with the solidarity of people like Arthur, Marcus, and Naya, she was confident they would succeed. Finally, Isabella looked each person in the eyes, her voice ringing with unwavering determination. We cannot change the past, but we can choose the future. And from this moment on, the future of Summit Wealthbank will be one without prejudice, without injustice, and without discrimination. That is the responsibility of each one of us, and I will do everything in my power to make sure it happens. Her words didn't merely fill the room, they echoed inside every mind, compelling each person to reflect and change. Justice isn't just about punishing past wrongs. It's about opening a new door where we all share the duty of building a truly fair, humane work culture. In those silent faces, there was more than respect for Isabella. There was a powerful conviction in the sweeping, profound and genuinely equitable reform she was determined to carry through. From today onward, nothing at Summit Wealthbank would ever be the same. Immediately after Isabella's forceful declaration of a sweeping reform program, the tension in the VIP lounge remained palpable. Derek Howard, recently dismissed, suddenly looked up at Isabella with anxious eyes tinged with a strange resolve. He seemed to be wrestling with an inner conflict, and at last broke the heavy silence once more. "Miss Carter, there's one more thing I need to confess," Derek said, his voice trembling and hoarse, each word weighted with deep shame. "Besides using force, I was tasked with managing a high-risk customer list. In reality, that list was made up almost entirely of Black and Latino clients." Derek's unexpected admission struck the room like lightning. Staff and patrons alike froze. Isabella's gaze was ice-cold, but her face betrayed profound disappointment as she grasped how deeply the problem ran. He drew a deep breath, steeling himself to reveal the horrifying truth that had haunted him. "This list has existed for years. Whenever those customers came in, they were placed under strict surveillance. Every one of their transactions and movements was monitored, and the slightest perceived irregularity, no matter how minor, was used as a pretext to refuse service or even escort them out." With each word, the onlookers' expressions hardened into outrage. Marcus and Nia exchanged bitter glances, realizing they had not been singled out by a few misguided individuals, but targeted by a covert systemic policy. Samantha and Brittany stood motionless, their faces ashen at hearing Derek reveal a secret they believed could never be uncovered. Even Chad Evans, though permanently banned, gasped in shock, recognizing how he'd benefited from this hidden system, his own biases silently endorsed by the bank. Derek continued, now speaking with nothing left to lose. "That database is kept under the highest security clearance. Only senior managers like Samantha and Stephen could access it. I was the one operating it directly, following their orders to keep it hidden and enforce the policy discreetly to avoid detection." At that, Isabella signaled to her trusted assistant, Anna Scott, who had been quietly documenting every detail. Anna nodded decisively, pulling out her phone to alert Summit Enterprises' tech and security teams. "Anna, secure all branch data immediately and launch a full investigation," Isabella commanded in a stern, decisive tone. "Lock down the list, all transaction records, and related archives. I want to know exactly who created this system and everyone involved." Anna sprang into action, exiting to contact the technical and security staff and prepared to enact an immediate lockdown. The room's atmosphere shifted from tense to a brewing storm, ready to sweep away the entrenched prejudice and corruption. Isabella turned back to Samantha, Brittany, and Stephen, her eyes blazing with both anger and sorrow. "You have not only violated professional ethics, but shattered the fundamental values this bank stands for. The prejudice you engineered has hurt customers and betrayed the trust of every person who believed in Summit Wealthbank." Marcus stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "What we've just heard is truly horrifying. No one deserves this kind of discrimination, especially not at a reputable bank. I trust you, Miss Carter, to do whatever it takes to ensure such wrongdoing can never happen again." Nia spoke up next, her voice trembling with held-back tears and fierce determination. "We believed in justice, but today we see how deeply that trust was betrayed. We need real, lasting change." Isabella met their eyes with genuine empathy and unshakable resolve. "I promise you that Summit Wealthbank will not merely change, it will be transformed at its core. Every corrupt system, every hidden bias, will be exposed and eradicated. That is my vow to every customer, to every honest employee, and to myself. No one in the room doubted her determination. Samantha, Brittany, Stephen, and Derek bowed their heads in despair, fully aware of the monumental consequences of their actions. They had not only lost their jobs and reputations, they had helped bring down a corrupt system they once blindly supported. In that moment, everyone present understood a profound truth. Today was not just the day justice was served. It marked the beginning of a deep-rooted revolution at Summit Wealthbank, where prejudice and discrimination would never again find a foothold. Immediately after announcing the launch of a sweeping investigation to eradicate the corrupt, discriminatory system once and for all, Isabella turned her gaze back to everyone assembled in the VIP lounge. The charged atmosphere shifted to a contemplative hush, as though they were all bracing themselves for one final message, one that could forever alter the way they saw the world and themselves. She walked slowly to the center of the room, her eyes softening but still brimming with strength and resolve. In that moment, she was more than just the CEO of a powerful corporation. She was the voice of justice, equality, and courage. "What happened today," Isabella began, her voice clear, steady, and compelling, "is not just my story or the story of a few customers in this room. It's the story of everyone who's ever been hurt by prejudice and bias." She paused, surveying the faces around her. Samantha, Brittany, Derek, and Stephen stood powerless under the weight of her words. Meanwhile, clients like Marcus and Naya watched Isabella with eyes full of trust and hope. Isabella pressed on, her tone growing even more emphatic. "We won't change by posting viral videos or offering vague promises. Real change demands courage, persistence, and concrete action to see justice done. Each of us must stand up, speak out, and act whenever we witness injustice, no matter how difficult that may be." A profound silence fell over the room. Isabella's words seemed to reach into each person's heart, prompting many to reflect on their own past silence or indifference in the face of wrongdoing. Then she turned to Nia Brooks, the young woman who'd once been refused service due to bias. Isabella looked at her with genuine compassion and determination. "Nia, I promise you that, starting today, I will personally assist you in opening the business account this bank once denied you. And more than that, Summit Wealthbank will stand by you every step of the way, proof of our unwavering commitment to real fairness." Tears sprang to Nia's eyes, but these were not tears of pain. They were tears of hope and sincere gratitude. She nodded wordlessly, her gaze speaking volumes. Marcus stepped forward as well, placing a reassuring hand on Nia's shoulder and turning to Isabella with deep respect. "Thank you, Ms. Carter, for rising up and doing what's right. Your actions today not only transform this bank, they inspire all of us." Isabella returned his smile, then addressed everyone in the room, staff, customers, and even those who'd made the mistakes. "Today, we've witnessed the devastating impact of prejudice and bias. But more importantly, we've seen the path forward, the path of change and accountability. I call on each of us, not just within Summit Wealthbank, but throughout our entire community, to stand up, speak the truth, and act every day to build a fairer world." Arthur Jenkins, who had acknowledged his own past errors and vowed to make amends, stepped close to Isabella, his voice earnest and resolute. "I stand with you in this journey. Together, we will uproot every false assumption and build a truly equitable culture." Isabella offered Arthur a warm nod, then turned back to the audience. "The fight against prejudice and discrimination won't be easy, but I firmly believe that when we stand united, nothing can stop us from creating something better. Every word we speak and every action we take today lays the foundation for our future and the future of generations to come." Her final words echoed powerfully in everyone's hearts. Remember, justice doesn't emerge on its own. Justice comes from our choices, when we decide never to remain silent in the face of injustice. As she concluded, the entire room rose in a heartfelt, respectful ovation. Samantha, Brittany, Derek, and Stephen bowed their heads in silence, finally recognizing that the prejudices they once upheld had completely collapsed around them. Marcus, Naya, and the other customers came forward to shake Isabella's hand with gratitude. They understood that, from this moment on, the bank would no longer be a place of injustice. Summit Wealthbank would stand as a true symbol of lasting change, where every person, regardless of race or circumstance, is welcomed and respected. When Isabella stepped out of the VIP lounge, followed by Arthur and Anna, she knew the struggle was far from over. But bolstered by the allies who stood with her, she was certain they could build a fair, humane future where prejudice would never again find a foothold. The VIP door closed gently behind her, but her powerful message of courage, justice, and compassion continued to resonate, offering a beacon of hope to everyone who'd witnessed it. That any one of us, anywhere, can help change the world, so long as we find the courage to speak up and act. Isabella Carter's story isn't just a lesson in justice, it's a powerful reminder that each of us can stand against prejudice and injustice. Real change doesn't come from silence, but from courage, solidarity, and decisive, righteous action. What about you? If you were in Isabella's shoes, how would you respond to a similar situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video, share its powerful message of fairness and equality, and subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring story. Thank you for being with us. See you in the next video.